What if Megatron never shot Orion Pax? Picture this. War Dawn Season 2, Episode 43. Megatron lands at an energy facility in Cybertron's past, and there's a young dock worker named Orion Pax already telling his friends that the Decepticons are amazing, that flying is amazing, that Megatron is a leader worth following. Megatron uses that admiration as cover for an Energon raid and then shoots him in the chest, which is a bold choice for a Saturday morning cartoon. The original David Wise script was uglier. Megatron was supposed to blow off Orion's arm and use it to decapitate him with it, which somehow made it past Hasbro's first round of notes before someone in legal woke up. The version that aired softened it, but only barely. But picture the version where the trigger never gets pulled. The same charisma that recruited every Decepticon recruits this dock worker too, and Orion Pax joins the cause instead of bleeding out next to a fuel pylon, which means Alpha Trion never has to rebuild him, which means Optimus Prime never exists. No Matrix lineage, no Autobot faction galvanized by the betrayal that birthed their leader. No till all are one speeches, and no one shall stand, one shall fall, because there's no stand and no fall when the two bots in question are drinking Energon together at a strategy meeting. Just a unified Cybertron and a dock worker who got to keep his name. The aerial bots, who in canon get flung back in time during this exact episode, would land in this timeline and find a planet already armed, already organized, already preparing for the slavers who built it to come back and try to reclaim their merchandise. They return home confused. The war they were sent to prevent already won itself. He had a believer. He chose to make him a corpse. And the franchise spent 40 years calling that destiny. But War Dawn is just one shot in one continuity. What if Megatron never threw the pickaxe? Picture this. IDW Comics Mining Outpost C-12. Senator Decimus shows up to announce full automation, which is a polite way of saying every miner is fired and starvation is now their problem. A worker speaks up, an Autobot guard cracks him open in front of everyone, and D-16 raises his pickaxe. Quick context. This D-16 was a poet, wrote political treatises so dangerous the Senate sent literal brain surgeons to cut the writing impulse out of his head, which is possibly the most government thing any government has ever done. The Senate of Cybertron was more scared of his sentences than his swing. In canon, the pickaxe leaves his hand and Decimus's bodyguard becomes a memorial. First kill. The slide begins. But picture the version where the pickaxe stays in his grip by 1 inch and 1 second. The miners walk out instead of fight back. The strike goes public. And Soundwave, who joined Megatron in the first place because he read his mind and saw he actually meant the equality thing, leaks the Decimus footage to every news outlet on Cybertron. Suddenly, the entire planet is watching a senator order the murder of a worker on camera, which plays badly even on a planet where decency is technically optional. The Decepticons become a registered political party. Functionism, the apartheid system that decides your social worth by your alt mode, gets actually questioned in actual legislative sessions, not whispered about in back alley pamphlets. Real votes with real consequences by real bots who can lose their seats if they don't show up. The poet wins, the Senate loses, nobody dies. Boring outcome, best one anyone ever got. But the Senate doesn't lose quietly. What if Megatron never massacred the Senate? Picture this. Senator Proteus, the slimiest politician on Cybertron, and that is saying something on a planet where the politicians have hover thrones, sees the Decepticons gaining real power, so he sets a trap, passes the Decepticon Registration Act, promises legal recognition, then quietly arranges for every registrant to be shipped to a rehabilitation institute, which is a polite name for a re-education prison with cleaner branding. Megatron finds out. The Decepticons let themselves be arrested, and then they massacre the entire Senate in Kaon, which is not a riot but a planned, deliberate ceremonial execution that ends every conversation Megatron was previously winning. But picture the version where Megatron answers Proteus's trap with documents instead of bodies, leaks the prison plan to every news outlet that hasn't already been bought. The Senate falls in a vote of no confidence, which is less satisfying than a massacre but significantly more legal. Functionism dies in court. The Functionist Council, the great IDW villain of later arcs, never gets to entrench because the same legislative reforms that killed Functionism also dismantled the council's seat allocations before they could consolidate. Shockwave's eventual genocide experiments don't happen. He stays a politician with a 1,000-yard stare and a research grant nobody approves. Tragic loss for horror fans, win for everyone else. The Decepticon Justice Division never forms because there's no war to enforce. Tarn never gets his name from the city Megatron was supposed to liberate. Helix never has to install a furnace in his chest. Voss is just a guy. Tessera stays a regular bot with no holes drilled into him for war crimes. Drift stays a drug-addicted street kid, gets help instead of a sword. Lives longer, less dramatic. The greatest IDW tragedy isn't that Megatron became a monster, it's that he gave the order to fight on a day he was already winning the vote. But IDW isn't the only continuity where Megatron stood in front of the right room at the right time and chose the worst possible words. What if Megatron asked the High Council to reform Cybertron instead of rule it? Picture this. Transformers Prime continuity, same guy, different name. D16 is now Megatronus, gladiator turned populist, the bot who shouted, "Freedom is every Cybertronian's right" in the pits of Chaos, and somehow turned a blood sport into a recruitment drive. He took the name Megatronus after one of the original 13 Primes, the one who would not bow to his brother's rules and forged his own destiny, which on paper sounds noble and in practice was a giant red flag he handed himself and then ignored. By the time the High Council agrees to hear him, his movement is so big they literally cannot ignore him. He gets an audience. He is about to win the argument that defined his entire life. And then he blows it. Stands in front of the council and demands to be named the next Prime himself by force, calling for the violent overthrow of Sentinel Zeta Prime in the same breath he was supposed to use for diplomacy. Reads the room and then misreads it on purpose, which is the most Megatron thing he ever does. Orion Pax, the bot Megatron personally guided into seeing the system's evil, stands up across from him and says, "It is not right to achieve justice with violence." The council hears the voice they wanted to hear. The Matrix goes to Orion, and the cause Megatron built spends the next 4 million years getting buried under a war he started over losing 1 vote. But picture the version where Megatron just once separates the cause from the crown, asks for reform instead of the throne, lets Orion stand next to him instead of across from him. Sentinel Zeta Prime falls anyway, reform happens. And Megatron, who didn't need to wear the Matrix to know he had already changed Cybertron forever, just goes home. The line we never hear in any TFP episode is the one that should have been the entire show's thesis. We were never enemies. We just disagreed. But there's a quieter version of the High Council fork that hits TFP fans harder. What if Orion never had to oppose him? Picture this. Same scene, same vote, same outcome. The Matrix still goes to Orion because Orion is genuinely what a Prime is supposed to be. But this time Megatron is fine with it because the cause was the point and he finally remembered that. Now watch what one decent moment in a council chamber saves. Bumblebee keeps his voice because the bot who tore it out is busy attending policy meetings instead of war crimes. RC keeps her partners, all of them. Tailgate, Cliffjumper. The deaths that define her entire arc on the show just never happen, which means Cliffjumper lives long enough to be insufferable about being alive, which honestly might be the truest version of him. Soundwave stays a loyal operative for a movement that didn't murder its way to legitimacy. Starscream stays a scientist scheming over small things, an irritation instead of a tragedy. Shockwave doesn't get to be Shockwave. The Predacons are never cloned. Predaking, the Decepticons' walking nuclear weapon, never gets built because nobody needed a nuclear weapon. And Cybertron stays alive, which means Dark Energon stays a textbook curiosity instead of a battlefield drug, which means it never gets poured into Earth's core, which means Unicron never stirs, which means Earth never enters the story at all, which means Jack Darby gets to be a teenager whose biggest problem is his mom, Miko stops drawing tanks in her sketchbook, and Raph's parents never lose him to a war they cannot see. Win, weird relief, win. 4 seasons of mutual devastation, written out by one honest sentence in a council chamber. But TFP shows us what dying brothers look like. G1 shows us what wasted ammunition looks like. What if the Decepticons stayed pointed at the people who actually deserved it? Picture this. The G1 cartoon writes Megatron as a flat conqueror, which is the whole bit, until Season 3's 5 Faces of Darkness drops a retroactive bomb that reframes every episode before it. Cybertron was a Quintesson factory planet. They built 2 product lines. Consumer goods, who woke up and became the Autobots. Military hardware, who woke up and became the Decepticons. The robots revolted, threw the slavers off the planet, and then immediately forgot what they were fighting for, which is the most relatable thing the Decepticons ever did. The Decepticons were not an aberration. They were literally built to fight. Their original cause was anti-Quintesson, a sovereign Cybertron, a refusal to be property. But picture the version where Megatron keeps the grievance pointed outward instead of turning it on his own neighbors. Builds a unified Cybertron preparing for the day the slavers come back. 5 Faces of Darkness, which in canon is a desperate Quintesson reconquest, becomes the easiest war Cybertron ever lost 0 bots in. The original G1 toy bio shows you the corruption in real time. Starts with young charismatic leader, ends with rule an empire which will span the universe. 24 words. The entire G1 fall fits on the back of a toy card. And possibly no Galvatron either. Galvatron is what Megatron becomes when Unicron finds a being so hollowed out by self-betrayal that there is room for a planet eater to move in. The slavers come back. They find a planet ready for them. Nobody on Cybertron dies. Optimus Prime never has to exist. So 3 continuities, 3 forks where Megatron breaks himself. In the 4th, the corruption doesn't even come from him. It came in a box. What if Megatron refused the sarcophagus? Picture this. Bayverse continuity, where the prequel comics quietly established that Megatron was not an underclass miner, but Lord High Protector of Cybertron, constitutional co-ruler with Optimus, sworn duty to defend the Allspark. Healthy, functional, doomed. During the Dark Age, Optimus's science division uncovers a sarcophagus in the city of Simfer that refuses to open. Megatron, in his protector role, takes it into his private quarters, which is the kind of decision that sounds responsible on paper and disastrous in every other way. He gets grievously wounded in an alien attack. The sarcophagus heals him. Inside is Megatronus Prime, the Fallen, one of the original 13, hiding in there for millennia, waiting for exactly this opportunity, which would make anyone motivated. The Fallen reads the resentment already sitting in Megatron's chest, the resentment that Sentinel Prime gave Optimus the spiritual title and left him the soldier's job. The Fallen does not invent it, he just turns the volume up until it drowns out everything Megatron used to believe. But picture the version where Megatron, wounded, refuses the artifact. Destroys it before it can finish talking. The Fallen has no instrument. His entire 10,000-year plan to drain Earth with the Sun Harvester depends on a corrupted champion on Cybertron, and one refusal cancels the plan across the rest of the franchise. The Dark Lord of Cybertron stopped by one bot reading the room for the first time in his life. But refusing the box is the hard version. There is an easier one, the one Megatron could have managed without even getting out of his chair. What if he just talked to Optimus about the relic? Same sarcophagus, same wound, same whisper in his head. But this time, before he listens to it, he walks down the hall to his brother's quarters and tells him the truth. That the thing in the box feels wrong. That it knows things about him he never told anyone. That he is scared. And Optimus listens. The Fallen has no instrument. The Allspark stays on Cybertron. Cybertron stays alive. Megatron never has to chase the Allspark across the galaxy, never crashes into Earth's Arctic in 1897, which means Sector 7 never forms, Archibald Witwicky stays sane, and the entire human plot of all 5 Bay films just quietly evaporates. Sentinel Prime never makes his desperate deal in Dark of the Moon. Quintessa has no champion in The Last Night. The line, "We were brothers once," becomes a line that never has to be said because they still are. And here is the part that breaks the whole thing open. Megatron himself answered this exact question in canon, in More Than Meets the Eye, 4 million years into a war that had destroyed every Cybertronian he ever cared about. He said, quote, "I lost the war the moment I gave the order to fight." He knew. He always knew. He just figured it out 4 million years late, which is the most Megatron thing he ever did. 4 continuities, 9 forks, 1 answer. And the part nobody says out loud in G1 and TFP, Megatron literally made Optimus Prime, pulled the trigger in War Dawn, lost the council vote in Prime, no betrayal, no hero. Awkward. Every single time he could have walked a different road. And every single time, the moment he didn't is the moment you can name. So none of this actually happened. But if you want to know what would have happened to Cybertron after the war ended in canon, that's your next lesson. Hit subscribe before Soundwave classifies this transmission.